Welcome to this session. For those who've been part of this Rashi study group for years and years and years, raise your hand if that applies to you. Bill. All right. Pop quiz, how many years has this group been going?
23.
25, 30.
All of you are right. Doesn't matter, a long time. But it started studying, here's a funny, interesting. What was the first thing that this group studied?
Talmud.
Talmud. I don't even, was it Rashi, Brachot? I don't even know.
It was one tedious year.
One tedious year. And then,
Big fan.
this was in the Foshe Tower, moved on to studying Rashi, and they said, why don't we start at the beginning, which was Genesis 1:1, and here we are in chapter 33. Anyone remember? Yes, 33. And now every few years we pause and we say, why are we studying this guy named Rashi? Who is he? What do we know about him? And one of the most amazing things that happened during COVID was we brought in an expert, Maggie Hanson, and I have some of my notes from studying with her. She's the author of Rashi's Daughters, and that already gives away that he had daughters. Now you know something about him. And so some of what I'm going to share is from her. And so folks in the room, you have a physical piece of paper that I'm going to use, and this is going to be a little bit more my speaking, but please interrupt with other information that you remember or questions or things to that effect. For those at home, I'm not going to share the screen so you can see what we're looking at as well. So, welcome to learning about this most extraordinary human being. And I'm actually going to start with something actually not on the screen, but this is, so I'll stop sharing. This is a little book by Elie Wiesel called Rashi. And it's a little, very accessible biography. And one of the things he does is he quotes another famous scholar, Avraham Grossman, who wrote a biography on Rashi, and he says, we are still studying Rashi not only because of his commentary, because, I mean, there are reasons why we're going to talk about why we would, but there's got to be something else. And he said that he has, it's also because of Rashi's personality. And he says there are 5 character traits that have to be taken into account if we are to grasp the reason why his immense work had so much impact. Number 1, humility and simplicity. The pursuit of the truth, respect for his fellow man, confidence in his own creative inspiration, and the feeling of accomplishing the mission of a community leader. So those are 5 traits that already give you a sense of the character of this person. Humility and confidence. I mean, so just think about that quality. And the other piece of this is we're going to just talk about the accident of history and why he's around at this time. I'm a little disappointed that Jules Goldstein isn't here. I just assumed he would be anytime we talk about history because he would have something to chime in, but everyone else has to take on that role. So let's go back to our study sheet and just learn some basic facts. Number 1, his name is Rabbi Shlomo ben Yitzchak. So his name is Shlomo, Solomon, we call him Rashi, but his name is Solomon, Sal, good old Sally. His dad's name was Isaac, Yitzchak. And if you didn't know this, a lot of our famous rabbis would get their names as an acronym, so you can see the underlined letters. Rashi is from Rabbi Shlomo ben Yitzchak. So that's Rashi. So his name Rashi is an acronym.
Is there any logic behind the choice of those letters? I mean, obviously I get the rabbi part, but why wouldn't it be Rami or, I mean.
So the ben means son of,
Right.
And that's going to get just dropped out.
Okay.
So then it could be Rashi, I guess could be the other way of doing it. But so it's taking most of the letters, but it's sometimes your Moshe ben Maimon. How do we say his name? Maimonides, Rambam. But Maimonides, so Maimonides is, what is that? That's Greek. Greek way of putting it. And the Rambam rather, Moshe ben Maimon is taking the main letters. And random fact, but I'll just say it instead of a question. Everybody's a rabbi who's named Rabbi, but if you're not a rabbi, you're not named Rabbi, such as Hillel. Everyone wants to call him Rabbi Hillel, who's not a rabbi. He preceded the era of people being called rabbis. Could he have been a rabbi? Sure, but he wasn't around at a time when they called people rabbis. Now you know. All right, so Rabbi Shlomo ben Yitzchak, first thing you should know is this is what he looked like. I don't know. Second thing you should know is these letters that are next to his head are Hebrew letters that are in a script that he could not read. Why? Because even though we call this Rashi script, it was not a script that he actually used. It was the script that was used to publish his work centuries later in the era of the printing press. And they found a printer in Venice, I think, figured out that these were ways to have the least amount of ink per letter, so you could save on ink. So, but this is the one interesting letter is they're all interesting, but the one in the upper right hand part of the box, top right. Anyone know what that letter is?
Hey,
Looks like hey. It looks like chet. It's aleph.
yeah.
And that's the only one that gets a little weird. Right, catty corner lower is bet. That looks like a 3. The others are fairly clear. All right. So born in 1040, we think. Maybe it was 1041. We don't have much information. In fact, let me just cut to the chase. We don't know much about Rashi at all. So most of this is conjecture, or based on just a few facts that we know. Born in Sarah, how do we say this town?
Trois.
Thank you. That's what I thought. I was going to say it the right way. Good. France. He died in 1105. This much we do know. By this point he was well known, and there's good documentation about his death. He was a vintner, maybe, most likely. I mean, most of the evidence seems to be that this was how he made his money, was through his winery. Most rabbis, in fact, most rabbis did not make a living being a rabbi. They made a living with something else, and then on the side they studied. He studied in Mainz, then Worms, with students of Rabbeinu Gershon. Anybody know anything about Rabbeinu Gershon? He was called Me'ir HaGolam, the light of the exile. And he was living around, let's just say, well, in fact, there's a tradition that is false, but it's a fun tradition, that he died in the year 1040, the year that Rashi was born. So he died, and the next great one was. He was the greatest of his generation, starting the yeshivot around on the Rhine River in these small little towns. So the Shum cities, what are the Shum cities? Spires, Worms, Mainz. Acronym again, you like acronyms? Shum. Shum in Hebrew means garlic. So there are symbols of garlic and the Shum city. Even if you go to the Shum city today, garlic on there, even though it has nothing to do with the names. These 3 cities were just fairly close to each other, and there were famous yeshivot in each of these cities. And if you were living anywhere in Europe around the time of 1000 and wanted to study, this is where you're going to study, because Rabbeinu Gershon, and you know of him in the following way. And this is actually a fact that Rashi says later in his life. It's any idiot, and he literally says idiot in the French, can forbid somebody from doing something. Only a great person can permit someone to do something. Let's think about that. Any idiot can forbid someone. It takes a great person to allow someone to do something. And so it takes a great rabbi to be lenient. Because you have to have confidence to stand up to your colleagues to say, you shouldn't let them do that, and wag fingers.
How prescient that is in today's political world.
It is. I agree. But anything in your mind about that? Or just in general?
Well, we just look at voting restrictions.
So, Rabbi Gunnar, his famous takana, the takana is an unprecedented decision, Talmudic decision. So if you are making a decision, you have to make it based on precedent, generally. But only once in a blue moon can you make a takana, which is an unprecedented decision. He made the unprecedented decision to, it's interesting now, it's going opposite way, so I forget something, but he forbade polygamy. He said marriage is now between one man and one woman. And that it had no precedent because in Judaism, men could have more than one wife. And there's in the book of Deuteronomy, it gives you provisions. I mean, it severely limits that practice. But his decision was it was between one man and one woman. And that took the polygamy off the books for Judaism. But not all Jews, just Ashkenazic Jews, because this is the center of the Ashkenazic world. The Sephardic world had other scholars and other ways of thinking about things. So this is Rabbeinu Gershom. He sets up these academies that everybody who was anybody would want to study, and Rashi eventually came, and he studied there with his students. And then his mom called him back and said, I'm tired of running the winery. You need to come back to Schwab. And he comes back to Schwab, and he starts teaching there, and there's more I can say about that. So his commentary, he was prolific. He wrote a commentary on every book of the Bible and all of the Talmud, except for some. When he died, his grandsons were the ones who took over his commentary. So I think I remember learning that he actually wrote a commentary on the Bible 3 times, each time improving upon it. It's remarkable. His style is, well, we'll talk about his style, is terse, but that is part of its brilliance, is that it's simple, and we're going to talk about what that means. He had 3 daughters, or maybe 4, but we know of 3 of them, and we know their names: Yocheved, Miriam, and Rachel. I was testing myself, not you. So those are the 3 daughters, and Maggie Anton, as I mentioned, wrote a book called Rashi's Daughters. It's a trilogy, and each book has a name of each of those daughters. Fun reading. It's all invented from her head, but based on a lot of research of the time and how cities worked. So before I share any more parts about how his commentary was, I want to read a couple things. This is, as I said, from Maggie Anson, who wrote Rashi. But let me just pause for questions. Everyone got a sense of his life? Rhine River, that's where he studied. Schwab, it's on the sheet. You can just see where it is. And actually, I'll make a quick note about that. What are you doing? So it's not far from Paris. So northern France is what we're talking about. If you were a great commentator from Provence, what is your name? Around the same time, David Kimchi, and his name is Radak. Same time period. If you are a famous commentator from Spain, Provence, and Italy, what is your name? Ibn Ezra, Abraham Ibn Ezra. So those 3 were the 3 big commentators around the same time period, which is giving you a sense there's something happening around this time that is causing commentators to want to write. Who was the one who said that all of them are wrong?
Would you out?
Rashi's grandson.
Roger's grandson, for sure, he might have, but also, who am I thinking? Nachmanides, Ramban, would often say, Ibn Ezra says this, and Rashi says this. He's much more prolific, and he says, but here's why they're both wrong. But his commentary doesn't get into the Jewish compendium until the 1800s, which is interesting. So those first 3 that I mentioned, Radak, David Kimchi, Abraham Ibn Ezra, and Rashi Shlomo ben Yitzchak, those 3 are the primary ones that are being talked about at the same time. But among all of them, those 3, Rashi is the guy. Why? His 5 characteristics, maybe, perhaps. Why? I'm going to share a little bit more of the realpolitik, what's going on in Schwab. And also because his style is so terse. And it's so clear, and so that it's easy to say, I agree with it, or I disagree with it, or to remember it. And that's that. Right. So first note that I have here is that he complained about having to come home to Troyes from Germany. He was compelled to write his commentary. Why did he write very tersely? So admirable. Again, consent is because his parchment was very expensive. So that's another thing. And it's also against the law to write down the commentary. Actually, let me just pause here and just let me give one other sort of context to the world. What is happening if you're a Jew around the year 600, 700, 800? Where's the center of the Jewish world? Babylon, or Iraq, I mean, wherever that area, Baghdad. What is happening in the rest of the world at that time? We've got the beginning of Islam and the Umayyad and Caliphate, which is, I'm forgetting whether it's Umayyad or Abbasid, that centers around Baghdad, but that is lifting, that becomes the center. And you have then the great Jewish leaders who have to match that leadership as well. So you get the exilarch, who's in charge of the Jewish community at that time, and everybody is focused on there. They've just finished compiling the Talmud around the year 600, and now we're in the era of codes, where you're going to compile all of this great thinking from the Talmud about what am I supposed to do into law books. Law books are called codes, books of codes. So this is what, if you're a Jewish scholar living around 700 to 800, around this time, your job is to try to bring things into a more easier format. And if you have a question, if you're living in France and you want to know what am I supposed to do about this chicken, am I allowed to eat it or not? You're going to write a letter to Baghdad to find out your answer. But around the year 1000, this is all breaking down. The Muslim world, things are splintering. The Jewish world, it's splintering. I won't get into all the reasons why. So now there's no more a center. And so that's why Rabbi Gershom also in Star rises, because he's setting up his academies on the Rhine River. And this is becoming now the center for Europe. So these kinds of realities are the things that affect why things happen. So at this point, the main focus of the Jewish world is going back to the basics. We've been learning all these laws and all these things, but what does the Torah actually say? And so they're getting back to reading the Torah, and they need a commentary to sort of like bring the oral tradition to people's schoolrooms and street corners where they're teaching this in a very clear way. And Rashi is basically one of the first people to do this. So it's not only that he was really good, he was also the first one. And if you're the first one, then everything gets based on what you do. That's another part of this. Questions? All right, back to some fun, interesting things. His mom's taking care of the vineyard. It's this is kind of like the Renaissance period, because in the rest of the Christian world at this point, people are going back to Aristotle, the Greeks, Roman literature. And so that's one other parts of the realities. Rashi's daughters actually are teaching Torah to the women in the town. There's some evidence that we have of that. He's writing his commentary as quickly as he could before he forgets it. Makes sense when he comes back. There is a king of France, but he's not really running things. The reality is that each area has its own count who is running things. So the Count of Troyes in the county of, anyone know what that region is called? Champagne. So Champagne is a genius in raising money. And what is his way of raising money? We're talking about the Count in the time of Rashi. He wants to have fairs. What are these fairs? There are 4 fairs: a hot fair in the summer, a cold fair in the winter, 6 weeks each, where there's a lot of, long counting too, but she said 4. All right, the Count had accountants working for the fair to keep track of who owes what to whom. All of this is bartering. Everything is kept track for the next fair. And the main commodities are wine, wood, and wool. No big source of wood in the Middle East. Silver bowl was less expensive than a wooden bowl in Jerusalem or Cairo. East and west have different stuff than that the other locality wants. Jewish merchants were a monopoly in trade. Wherever they would go along the trading route, they would find other Jews who would give them hospitality. They'd have the same law, Talmud law, common language, Hebrew. They knew what to do if anyone got ransomed or captured. So 2 big changes in Rashi's time. So we're talking about why Jews were becoming middle people in this stage. Manufacture of steel, which is stronger than iron, and it was used for plows, which used to be woods, for horseshoes. And now they had, and here's the big piece. Agriculture is increasing by extraordinary magnitudes in this time. especially with these fairs, who now they're trading. They had excess food. Now, not everyone needs to work in agriculture. Some could become artisans. Now you could sell in excess, and Jews would become the middle people. So this is, and now in Troyes, becoming a major center in France for this, because of these fairs. They would take, the count had really good accountants who would take a cut for themselves, and this is how he would do well. And the Jews in Paris, even there's some notes in Paris, were jealous of the Jews living in Troyes at this time, who could just do nothing and earn money. There was some text about that. Here's the big thing. The Count at some point realized he had a local scholar and he wanted to monopolize on this. And the Jews who were coming to town for business, for these fairs, were working during the day, but at night, in the mornings and the evenings would work, but in the afternoons they could study with Rashi. And now he starts promoting this, and more people know about these two big fairs every year. And you can not only trade your goods, but you can study with this man, Rashi. I think some of these other things are just fun, but not necessary. Yeah, I think those are all just, these are fun things about why the Crusades happened and things like that, which are interesting because the first Crusade is 1095, which is right during Rashi's lifetime. So, and this is really key. In fact, I want to read this as well. Because the part that we are studying literally is about Rashi's biography. We are studying, for those who know, I'm reminding, but everyone else, chapter 33 is a relationship between Jacob and Esau. When we read about Esau in the Torah, we're reading about a guy who seems to be taken advantage of and seems somewhat innocent and seems to be doing the right thing. But Rashi doesn't think so. And this is one thing that Elie Wiesel points out as well. But just so here's the main piece. Imagine living in a time of the Crusades. Imagine the people who are being sent to Jerusalem wanting, and there was this well documented, to kill as many Jews, heathens along the way. So a lot of the massacres of this time period, the Crusades, are happening around Rashi's time, or people being forced to convert, which is the origin of Kol Nidre, the prayer, it's not a prayer, a statement to try to get out of being forced to convert, or that that oath didn't count. Rashi reserves he basically treats all biblical characters nicely and gives them the benefit of the doubt, except for Esau. Esau represents Christianity. And so he's seeing what's happening with what's going on with the Christian community, with the Crusades. I won't read it. I mean, that in essence is the point. So of course we have to read his commentary about Esau in light of his day. And what he's dealing with. And so he does lift up the Midrashim selectively that have to do with Esau being a no-goodnik. Actually, there was one specific one. I was trying to remember where did that come from? Oh, let's see. This will be a reminder for those who heard it. Everybody remember, picture in your mind, when Esau returns from the fields tired and famished and sells his birthright to Jacob, right? That's the beginning of their relationship. Why was he tired? We could assume that he had just done some strenuous work, but Rashi said that's a completely different reason. Anybody remember what Rashi said? He was tired from so much killing. So, where does that come from? Well, it comes from his lived experience. I think that is probably enough for understanding sort of the context of Rashi. We're going to get into a little bit about what does his commentary do, but let me just pause if anybody has any other facts about 11th century France or Rashi.
Really could use Jules.
Well, do we have any idea how many Jews there were at that time in that place?
Awesome question. No, I don't. Yeah, this is what you get from me being, I mean, I've studied a little bit of this, but I'm a scholar, I haven't written my PhD in the 11th century things.
What?
I know, I'm working on it. Yeah. Catherine?
Well, I mean,
Oh, Adam first, and then Kathleen, sorry.
Kathleen, go first, please. Sorry.
No, I just wanted to ask, because I know nothing about this period of history. I just wanted to ask Rabbi if you could share a link to what you have on the screen share. If we wanted to make a copy of it, that was all.
Absolutely. Actually, what I'll do is I'll just send a PDF of it as a follow-up. Thank you. Adam and then Maury.
One thing, just to put a plug in, that I would be curious to see the actual landscape where he lived, and wondering whether we might at some point plan or consider a congregational trip to France. I think that would be just lovely. And the other thing is a question like, what do we know about, and I guess I could say the mechanics, but just like, what was the tempo of what was being written versus shared? Did he kind of go straight through in the way that we do from Genesis on? Is he writing little snippets and pages? Is he writing on parchment? I mean, just what do we know about how he got these thoughts down on paper, and what the sequence was?
It's a great question. I don't know how much we know about that, except that it seems to be that it seemed, well, I mentioned earlier that it seemed to go through the whole cycle 3 times, which makes me think it was sequential, that he was working in order on this. I mean, and I'll just share a famous Rashi commentary is Genesis 1:1, which is, why does the Torah start with Genesis 1:1? That's the question. By the way, those who know that he doesn't tell us what his question is. He just gives us the answer for us to figure out what his question is, which is an interesting problem solved. But his answer to that is, as opposed to starting with Exodus chapter 12, which is where you get the first commandment to the Israelite people, which is to set a calendar. That's where he thinks the Torah should begin. Why do we have everything to be set before? To prove why God gave the land of Israel to the Jews. That's his answer. And again, you think, what is going on with his mind? I mean, the entire purpose of Genesis is to say that God is the God of everywhere, and so God can make these choices. This is the time of the Crusades. So of course, it makes sense, once again, that the commentary is somehow colored by this time period. But now let me use this moment, Adam, and your question as the big reveal. Mount Zion is going on a trip to France and Germany on October 25th, 2025. We have been talking about this for years, but not only that, our tour guide is going to be Mike Hollander. He had just agreed. Mike Hollander, for those who know, taught during COVID on Sundays a travel log through Germany, and he taught about each of these cities, and we can show what they were. I mean, we have the recordings of them, which are extraordinary. But he just agreed to be our tour guide. October 25th, right now, the plan is to fly into Frankfurt, to go to the cities, the Shum cities, to start there, to find where he studied. We won't find it. To find the street where he lived. We won't find it. And there's lots of plaques and other things to look at, and other things about Jewish history, which we will find. To take a high-speed train to Paris, to be in Paris, to get to know the Jewish community there. And my friend, Rabbi Tom Cohen, sounds like a good French rabbi, is going to be meeting us, and we're going to have Shabbat with him. And he's done in the footsteps of Rashi, and we'll then take a bus to Troyes, and we'll spend a day there. And we'll do other things in that sort of space and that are of interest. Right now, the thought is 1 week, 8 days for this trip, and more information to come. But I'm very excited because it is something we have been talking about for a long time. I know that it's not possible for everyone, but for those who are interested, I will invite you to be in touch with me and just let me know of your interest. Any questions on the trip?
Did you say 24 or 25?
25. I know, it was, Mike was like, hold it, that's 2 years away. I said, yes, I know. It's the way. For those of you who are saying, but wait, I want to go to Israel. Good. June 23rd, 2025, we're doing a family trip to Israel. And Uri Feinberg, who is a phenomenal guide, I've been wanting to have him be my guide for years and years and years. He will be guiding us. But wait, if you want to go to Poland, May 24, this is actually sooner, and I'm serious, or June 20, is it June? No?
I think it's into June for sure. I thought it was June 2nd to 10th.
Yeah, June 2nd to 12th, with Rabbi Adler. And so that is a Poland trip. We're sort of getting people's excitement about traveling again. And if anyone wants to go to Virginia, Minnesota, or something closer, we can work on that too. Haven't arranged it. All right, Maury. back to you, Rashi.
Well, the rabbi stole my thunder, and this is a shameless plug. But my wife and I are going to Paris this fall, and we have planned at least a day trip, probably an overnight trip, to Troyes. What I had wanted to do was do a live stream on Facebook at the time of Rashi meeting. If we're going to have it the day I was going to be there. I don't think that will be possible, but my intention is to visit as many unknown places for Rashi as possible, take photographs, and then maybe do a presentation, kind of a preview. I know, for example, that Rashi's grave is probably under a little park in Troyes, and there are some plaques there, and I will certainly take photos of that. I would hope, if I'm still around, to be able to go back on the Germany-France trip as well in 2025. But so I will be bringing a little bit of Troyes and maybe some of the land between Paris and Troyes sometime by the end of this year, probably maybe in October, but probably in November or December.
Awesome. Safe travels. We're very excited you're doing that, and this will be a nice preview for everyone, and just information, just to actually picture it and see it. So let me now transition a little from biography to about what is going on with this commentary and what are we learning. This is we're going to continue primarily next week as well as we start looking into methodology. So when I say who is Rashi, today was biography, but you can't really say who is he without looking at his commentary too. Next week when we say what is a Rashi refers to his comments and what makes them historical, famous, important, and what is his methodology. That's what we're going to look at next week. So for right now, I wanted to share a little bit about why Rashi. So it's a little biography. He is, Rashi, looking for the straightforward answer to problems in Torah. So we often talk about Midrash. Midrash with a capital M refers to the body of literature from the 2nd century BCE to around 900 CE. That time period, it's 1,000 years, where people were writing in a certain style to make homiletic meaning of the Bible, of Torah. And so that's what people's minds were in, like, how does it make my life better? And I can tell fun stories around the campfire. But at some point around this time, they're starting to say, what does it actually say? What's it really saying? So the pshat is, what does the Torah say? The drash is, what can we learn from the Torah? By the way, there are lots of definitions for pshat and drash, but pshat is another way of saying it. Today, this is the way we understand it. What did the author have in mind? Authorial intent. Another way of putting it is contextual meaning. What does it mean in its own context? Another way of putting it. Or what do the words mean together? Bless you. With no eisegesis. Eisegesis means reading in. Reading in is taking your own thoughts, like, I don't like the Christians, I'm going to put that into the text. So even Rashi, who is saying, my job is to say what the Torah actually says, is guilty of not doing pshat. Another way of putting this is what I write is pshat, what you write is drash. And that actually is what Nachmanides will say to all Rashi is like, come on, that's not what it really says. Or his grandson, famous fights between Rashi and his grandson. He had two famous grandsons, the Rashbam, who is the one who mostly takes him on in this, and Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam is the one who has major authority in the Talmud. So he started this whole legacy of learning. Yeah,
Didn't Rashi
Rabbi?
also,
Rabbi,
just one second.
this is
John first, and then John first, and then go ahead. John.
yeah, so didn't Rashi also sometimes like code his meaning too? Like as far as like not wanting the Christendom to know that he was criticizing them, sort of using Esau for that. I thought we saw that at times.
That makes sense. It's not, I'm not recalling like a specific
Okay.
way I've read that says that, but it does, I know in the Talmud, it's certainly, there's a lot of code on that way, wink, wink,
Okay.
kind of things. That's what I mean. I apologize. Who was reading? Who was speaking?
Lisa, sorry.
Go
Sorry
ahead,
to
Lisa.
interrupt. I'm going back about 5 or 10 minutes. I'm actually zooming on my phone for the first time ever. I'm on my way to visit the grandsons. Anyway, I am very interested in the trip in 2025. I just wanted to let you know that. Because by the time I get anywhere where I can write it down, I may have forgotten. So I just wanted to let you know that. Okay?
I am so glad you did. Everybody should know that Lisa was the
Yeah,
first
great.
person.
Thank you.
First person to sign up for their 2017 Israel trip. And so now you're the first person to sign up for this one, so.
Yeah, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna be the first one again. Okay, thanks.
Excellent. All right, so Pshat, Drash, I want to read a couple more definitions of Pshat. This comes from different people I've studied with over time. A verse, you have to just listen to this, right? A verse never leaves its plain sense. A verse never leaves its plain sense. Pshat. Or David Ingber says, Rabbi David Ingber, the verse cannot be released from its unadorned meaning. Poetic. The straightforward meaning of scripture is to be preferred. The text does not leave its obvious meaning. And this one I like. Don't get too weird. We're going to show where it's going to get a little weirder. The verse never loses its contextual meaning. Or sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. All right. So those are all definitions of Pshat. Sure. Regine. Regine, I see that you have your hand raised. Am I frozen? Oops,
Muted.
Muted. There we go. That's good. Hard to see. We have so many people here. It's awesome.
So it's occurred to me over these many years that sometimes there's not a bright line or a firewall between Pshat and Drash. And that over time, and maybe by custom, Drash comes to be accepted as the plain meaning of the text. Does Rashi have anything to say about that? I mean, even in our discussions, it sometimes seems like we're using Drash as what the text is trying to say.
So excellent points, and Rashi doesn't have anything to say about it, which is partly the challenge here. He never talks, he doesn't write an introduction to his work. Nachmanides writes an introduction to his work. Rashi, there's no introduction, like, or even when we were asking, did he start from Genesis and work on this? We don't know. The only insight we have to anything about Pshat, slightly, is from his comments on chapter 3, verse 8 of Genesis. And there's where we're going to turn right now. So I want us to go ahead and share. If you have your book, you're welcome to find it. Or you can start at the screen, it's up to you. So here, chapter 3, verse 8. Since we are turning to Torah, let's say the lesson for the study of Torah, which ends Ma'asot to the great Torah. Asher Kishana B'mitzvotav v'tivanu la'afut b'divrei Torah. Vayishmu et kol Adonai Elohim mithalech began ruach hayom. They heard the sound of God, Adonai, moving about in the garden at the breezy time of day, and the human and his wife hid from God, Adonai, among the trees of the garden. I love this translation, Adam meaning human, which at this point I think it is man and woman, but
That's not how it's translated here.
I am surprised. By the way, Sefaria.org, Sefaria means library. It is the now gift to the Jewish world. All Jewish texts almost are on here, including, you can have different translations of this verse. But if you click on commentary and you click on Rashi, who is the first one, he says there are many midrashic explanations. So already drash, midrash, drash. Midrashic explanations, our teachers have already collected them in their appropriate places in Genesis Rabbah and other midrashim. I, however, am only concerned with the plain sense of scripture and with such agadot that explain the words of scripture in a manner that fits with them. Why here he decides to sort of pull back the curtain and talk a little bit about why he's doing what he's doing, who knows? But this is the one place where he says, and let's just say again in a different language what he says. He's saying others have done drash. I'm interested in pshat, the plain meaning, but he doesn't stop there. And with agadot, legends, it's an agada is the opposite of halacha. Halacha is law. Agada is legend. Or to Stuart's point, one generation's agada becomes the next generation's halacha. You know, there's a relationship. Or if for those who are lawyers, there's a famous article called Nomos and Narrative, and that's another way of thinking about halacha and agada. He is saying there is some agada, some legends that are going to help with the plain sense of the meaning of the text. You can already hear why other commentators are going to say, not so fast, Rashi, that's going a little too far. But that's what he's saying.
Is Shot supposed to have more authority than Drash?
That's what Rashi and David Kimchi and even Ezra are setting up. They're setting up a hierarchy. They're saying Shot is what we're interested in. They're trying to get what the text actually says. But that's introducing this new idea. By the way, there's Pshat, there's Drash, there are two other levels. What are the other two levels?
Remez and Sod.
Remez, which means allegory, and Sod, which means mystical, secret. And you put them together and they spell Pardes, which means orchard. And then there's a legend of 4 rabbis going into the Pardes, the orchard, and only one leaves unscathed, and that is Rabbi Akiva. So to go into the orchard means to get into the mystical deep levels of the Sod, and not everybody can handle that. So
I apologize if I missed it, but can you define drash or define it again relative to Peshat?
yeah, drash is, well, I'm just gonna go back to this for a second. On one level is what can we learn from the Torah? You know, but that's not so helpful. It's another level is reading into the Torah, your own life experience or what you're, it's the parts that are missing, so you're making stuff up to explain things. That's drash. Another way of thinking about it is the homiletical reading of Torah. How does it make sense in your life? But it's going to be debated. Let's just look at this verse right here as another example. And when they came to Marah, they could not drink of the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore, its name was called Marah. This is now in the book of Exodus, Shemot. We're talking about the Israelites. So what is bitter? What's the pshat answer? Make it up. What's the literal answer? Why they couldn't drink of the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. So what is bitter?
Waters.
The waters. The waters were just, they actually were tasted bad, right? That's the straightforward. Like, why do you have to say anything more? What is a potential drash answer? Make it up.
the fact that they were not in their home, they were dispersed.
Nice, thank you, Janet. So therefore, anybody want to add on? Not in their homes, they're dispersed.
They felt bitter.
They felt bitter maybe, so maybe it's describing the way they're feeling about each other in this moment. They were feeling, does the verse say that? No, they just had some bad water and they need to find better water. But maybe, why is this detail added in the Torah? You have to start asking yourselves. And then you start thinking, well, maybe it's because there's something the Torah is trying to teach us that's more subtle and we have to read into a little bit more. Okay, it's talking about people can feel bitter when they're on the 40-year journey. All right. Any other comments?
Yeah, it can also, I mean, this is further away from the shot, but create a relation between Mara is bitter and Miriam, who generates in a way the well through the desert.
Nice. So Miriam sounds kind of like Mara. That her name sounds bitter, but she's the one who gives them clean water that is not bitter. And Miriam's well accompanies them. Miriam's well, which was created on the eve of the 6th day of creation. One of them supernatural things that we can't explain. So anything supernatural we can't explain. There are 10 of them are created right before Shabbat begins. And God says, good enough. All right, one more definition, because I think this is the layering thing, thinking about this. God's united layering. First example, the shot of the meaning of Babel, the Tower of Babel. What is the straightforward meaning? What is the drash meaning? So let me just answer by reading it. Rashi will look at the Torah's explanation that it comes from the word Balel, meaning to confuse and mix up. The Tower of Babel, their languages, their tongues were confused and they couldn't speak to each other, and then they had to give up on their building project and they dispersed, which is what God wanted. So the Tower of Babel, it works in English as well, and that's why they call it the Tower of Babel. But the truth is, the real shot is that it comes from Bab El, gate to God, gate of God. They were creating a gateway of God. That's why it's called the Tower of Babel. That's the shot versus the drash. But Rashi would have called the Tower of the confusing shot. So he would call what his answer was about confusing tongues. He would call that shot. We would call his answer what he calls shot. No, that's a drash. All right, if you're confused, good. David Weiss Alibni.
Is it sometimes hard to tell the difference?
Yes. Yes, that's partly why I'm being a little, facetious in this, but I'm trying to give clarity and also say there are reasons why people have written, why David Weiss wrote an entire book called Shot and Drash. It's because people don't agree.
Half this room is lawyers. I think we're all thinking, there's so many parallels to law and interpreting law and original intent and dictum and all these different things. On how close the corollary really is.
It makes total sense to me. Let me read this from Weiss Livni. He argues that pshat in antiquity means context. I already shared that. I learned it from him. It did not mean authorial intent. Pshat is what fits the whole context. The verb lipashot means to extend, which includes eisegesis. Drash means reading out of context. Drash looks at a single word. Pshat looks at the whole verse. That's an interesting thing. So you can take things out of context and come up with an entire meaning when in the context of it makes no sense. But that's fun. I mean, there are a lot of fun things we do with it. Let me give you my favorite example. Genesis 7:16. Yeah.
What is Rashi's understanding of who wrote the Torah?
Yeah. So that's a really important point. Whereas, there's just no question, God wrote the Torah, and they're not different schools, JEPD. So there's no historical analysis. So therefore, anything that is in conflict with each other needs to be reconciled, and that's his job. So the context is to reconcile things that seem irreconcilable to us, or things, and then this is getting into next week, seems to be superfluous. Why does the Torah need to tell us this? He's got to have an answer for why, because God wrote it. That's the premise. What's interesting is fast forward to 20th century universities who are all of a sudden interested in, I'm not getting the right language on this, literary analyses of Torah as well. They're interested in seeing it as a whole thing and seeing the redactor at some point put the whole thing together. And so I'm just interested in the whole thing. I don't want to break it apart into those things. At some point, someone thought this worked as a whole, and now let's try to understand it. Robert Alter is one of the famous people who did it in his translation. Everett Fox. So they're doing something that is very similar to what Rashi and Radak were doing, and that's why there's a through line from Rashi to Alter. Find that out too. Just remember the first number, 716. This will bring us back to some of us who were here with Peter Pitzela, who wrote a book called Bibliodrama, and he came in as our guest to Rashi years and years ago when we were in chapter 7, so that shows how long ago it was. And then he had us act out this theme. So this is about Noah. They entered, comprised male and female of all flesh, as God had commanded him. And God shut him in. Vayiscor Adonai be'ado. It's a throwaway end of this verse. We don't really think about it. God shut who in? God shut Noah in. This is the moment that the ark is, the rains are about to come. Noah had finished building it, brought all the animals, and now he closes the door. Noah closes the door. But that's not what it says. Noah didn't close the door. God closed the door. Why? This is the part we acted out. So this to me is Marlon Brando in Apocalypse Now. The horror, quoting Conrad. So it's like he's seen all of his uncles and aunts and other people who are not going to get onto the ark. He's realizing this is the end of the earth as he knows it. And he's frozen. He can't do it. I would argue that's the shot. But let's see what Rashi says. And this is just to show what Rashi's understanding of shot might be a little different from ours. The Lord Sherman. God protected Noah so that they could not smash up the ark, meaning all the people outside. He surrounded the ark, thus enclosing the Segor with bears and lions, which killed some of them. So, actually, he's going to be self-referential in a second. His first answer is, there are lions and tigers and bears, oh my, who are outside of the ark, protecting the ark, and that's all out there. And that's the literal contextual meaning of what's going on here. Where does it say that in the Torah? It doesn't. He's making this up. By the way, he never makes stuff up. He's quoting Midrash. So the book of Genesis Rabbah, which you referenced earlier, he's going to quote Genesis Rabbah here, right? But why is he going to bring in Drash? He's only going to bring in Drash if he thinks it solves the text better than a shot. So then he goes on to say, but the literal meaning of the text is he shut the door in front of him against the waters. That's it. I won't go into the rest of it. So he's recognizing that there's a shot that he doesn't like. Oh, was I not sharing the screen? I apologize. There we go. Here's the verse. And Adonai shut him in. That's Vayiscor Adonai et bi'ado. Go to Rashi. And he protected him so that he could not smash up the ark. He surrounded the ark with bears and lions, which killed some of them. But the literal meaning of the text is he shut the door in front of him against the waters.
Are you saying, or have we learned all along that Rashi can take Midrash and convert it back into shot?
Yes.
Okay. So he can.
That's my reading, but his grandson's going to come out for it, and so if you read Rashbam right on that verse, he says, "My grandfather got it wrong." By the way, if you want to know another famous machloket debate between Rashi and Rashbam, grandfather grandson, it's on the mezuzah. Rashi says that the mezuzah should be up and down. It's about our relationship with God. Rashbam says it should be vertical because it's about a relationship with the people in this house. It's about us. And our tradition is to compromise between the grandfather and grandson and put it on an angle to show that as you enter your house, you have to start with compromise to make shalom bayit, peace in the house.
That
A
is
nice thought.
fascinating. I always wondered why.
Well, then I think like that's a good way to end.
Yeah.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank
Next week online, and we will look more at other commentaries and other things. And if you have other questions, please bring them. And it's so great to see so many who are checking this out. Have a good week. Shabbat shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thanks, Rabbi.